science log 460. In constructing the general purpose rail net for large scale logistics, I have discovered that I like trains, and I have considered the numerous possibilities of what trains could be used for and how they could be used. For instance, here I have developed a technology for inserting a train into a station in either orientation, and the station can adapt to that orientation, and so it would be an ambidextrous station. For instance, in this configuration, with iron being near to the green side and copper being near to the yellow side, the result is that the two products are sorted with iron above the copper, and the inverse of iron being below and copper above. This state is also rectified by this configuration. And so, using this, if the train was to be reversed by a number of movements through the network, now notice that the train is in the opposite orientation, and it can still perform as it once did. And this is due to the unique configuration of this station. This is similar in design to a concept in electronics that allows for controlling a motor in either direction, specifically I believe a brushed motor. Fortunately, this technology has not yet been necessary due to, in my net of trains that I've constructed, the trains only travel between 2 points, and they trace the same path in each occasion. And because all of the stations that I use are end stations rather than inline stations, there is no instance where a train could switch orientation. I have discovered that the design that I have used unto now for equalizing the distribution of conveyor contents is critically flawed, in that notice the void in front of the equalizer and the clog behind the equalizer. This is due to the filters having limited propagation rates horizontally, and so to rectify this, a more complex design should be used. Perhaps a local robotic redistributor. Here in the central sectors of central processing, there is the science production facility, or rather the science production zone. In this specific part of that zone, I have constructed a sequential multiplexer that is reprogrammable. the arms are programmed with specific ratios, and the sequencer that is communicating with the edge trigger triggers one arm on the rising edge of the signal and the other arm on the falling edge. And so with this, two ingredients can be multiplexed accurately, not using the typical mechanical means of splitters, which are far less predictable. I have completed the design of a prototype signal grapher. Here it is graphing what is known as sawtooth wave from a counter using a reprogrammable sampler. Here this sequencer is the sampler, sending pulses once every 100 cycles, and this is the component that defines the range that is displayed. In this instance it is 0 to 16. Within the grapher, these are data cells. Each one of them stores a value and sends the current value to the next cell upon every trigger of the sequencer, or the sampler in this case. And these components are used for precise timing to alleviate a memory cell destabilization problem. I have been experimenting with the complexities of Reactor 377-2A-3. There are many fascinating ratios and more complex mechanics involved, such as heat dissipation rates, which involves thermodynamics and fluid propagation mechanics, as well as consumption and production. Eventually, there was the necessity of installing these pumps to increase flow rate. A fascinating detail is that these pumps can pump exactly a factor of 10 times more liquid than the offshore pumps that are supplying them. Here, notice the number, the pumping speed in the tooltip. The maximum is 1200 in this case, and here it is 12000. That is one additional 0, which is one factor of 10. And this is the first set of 3, and this is the second set of 3. There are also stabilization tanks to prevent rapid fluctuation of pressure within the system. Due to my lack of expectations for how this entire sub-facility would operate, I did not precisely plan the locations of these turbines, and so they are located amorphously, and it would appear that the double-wide heat distribution does function precisely as I expected, with what would appear to be double distribution rate, which appears to allow for far greater reach, as well as this feature that I suspected would also amplify the effectiveness of the reactor, which is the direct heat dissipator, which is merely a block of heat distributors and it would appear that increasing the number of parallel distributors in this way does increase the dissipation rate, which allows for heat to leave the reactor at a far greater rate, which itself allows for far greater propagation and apparently for turbine capacity to be increased as well. I have optimized this specific Spidertron to have maximum speed with 10 additional legs. Of course, this leaves no room for the standard arc reactor. However, this allows for the robot to move at a far greater speed. Additionally, I have noticed that with these doors, their ability to sense motion and probable motion should be sufficient for a computer interface or an interface with a similar device that could be installed into a control room. Currently, in the rail net, there are two types of rail sector or rail zone, and that is firstly the general purpose zones that allow for travel in both directions simultaneously, as well as many trains. And secondarily, there are the specialized zones that are meant for only one train to use. These zones include stations and tracks that do not require more than one train, such as the antiquated distribution tracks that were originally used and were used specifically to conserve resources and time. Now, these 3 parallel tracks are redundant and could be replaced with 2 parallel tracks for increased efficiency. One advantage of this general purpose net is that when a new station is required, it can merely be added to the nearest part of the net. In this instance, copper harvesting here is attached to the entire net by this juncture, and from that juncture to copper refinement here. And this also allows for trains to travel to any point in the net, even points that they do not need to be. This also allows for train repurposing dynamically, which can be more powerful than merely deconstructing the train and moving it to a new zone. It would appear that robots are quickly replacing the need for belt multiplexing, and so I believe that that should only be used when robots are not readily available. I have noticed that due to the limited robot recharge rate, adding additional roboports in a cluster would increase the theoretical maximum robot recharge rate and thus allow for far greater robot travel capacity. In this instance, it is visible that these 2 roboports are being used frequently. And so, distributing these roboports at maximum distance would appear to maximize the roboport volume. However, it would minimize the Roboport recharge effectiveness.